Good morning, Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We are concluding our discussion of the actual commandments of the Ten Commandments today as we talk about the last commandment, not to covet. We're going to continue to talk about the Ten Commandments for two more of our study times together. We want to talk next time about the second tablets of law and why they were given and the warning that we received from that. And then we want to go to Hebrews chapter 12, where the writer of Hebrews compares and contrasts the experience of receiving the Ten Commandments versus the experience of receiving the gospel. So, the last command, number 10, in anybody's numbering system of the Ten Commandments, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Coveting, desiring to have for yourself, to the point that it is an obsession. Wanting more, greed, never having enough. Ahab wanting Naboth's vineyard, even though he had extensive lands. David taking Bathsheba, even though he could have countless blessings and had multiple wives and could have had more, but taking something that belonged to someone else. The instigation for that theft is the coveting itself. It is the thought that brings forth the deed that brings forth death that James describes in James chapter 1. And if we needed Old Testament proof that these commands have to be kept from the inside out, this tells us. Because coveting is something that is completely internal. It is expressed in external ways by committing adultery, by stealing, by murdering, by lying. In other words, it is the internal motivation for the previous laws that have been given. So when Jesus says, I'm not making anything new up here, I'm telling you how to read the law as God gave it when he gave it to you, he's telling us the absolute truth. It's clear, because coveting is the internal motivation behind the other laws that he's talked about when he talks about adultery and stealing and lying and murdering. It all goes back to wanting something that you don't already have and then expressing that desire with bad activity, which brings about death. Sometimes the actual death of other people, or our own actual death, but certainly spiritual death. And so coveting is something that is the motivation behind the violating those laws between us and each other. But as Paul points out in Colossians chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, coveting and greed is idolatry. And so coveting is itself a violation of all the Ten Commandments, is the motivation behind the violation of all the Ten Commandments. Why did Eve eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Because she coveted it, because she looked at it and it looked good, because her appetites called out for her to have it, and because it was desirous to make one wise. She coveted knowledge that God had. The serpent said to her in the day, God said, don't eat it, because he knows that when you eat it, you'll be like him. You'll know good and evil. And she wanted to be like God. She was coveting something more than what God had given her. And so God tells us in the giving of the commandments themselves that they have to be kept from the inside out, that they're more than just narrowly interpreting prohibitions. It's something that happens from internally, and it expands out to make claims on us. And he makes that clear. He makes it absolutely clear in the law against coveting. And we would do well to listen. Because when Jesus says, listen, I'm fulfilling this, I'm not I'm not nullifying them in any way. I'm not rewriting the laws. I'm teaching you to read them the way God gave them. He's exactly right. Because if we listen to the 10th command, we understand that the motivation behind why we have violated any of the previous commands lies in the keeping of this law, being satisfied with who God is and who we are and what God has given us and what God has not given us, and respecting our role in the world that God has given to us. The dissatisfaction with any of that is what's behind the breaking of all these other commands. And Jesus makes that clear in Matthew chapter 5 and 6 when he talks to us about telling the truth and about being faithful to in our relationships with our spouses and being respectful of each other's personhood. It all goes back to that motivation of coveting. Wanting something goes all the way back to the first sin in Genesis chapter 3, wanting things that God has not given to us and then taking them for ourselves. That's always wrong, and it leads to everything else that is wrong. Okay, we'll talk about the second set of tablets and why they are necessary next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes.